Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this humanitarian plenary, as local as possible, as international as necessary. My name is Mozam Malik. I'm Chief Executive of Save the Children UK. It's my pleasure to be hosting you and the moderator for this event this afternoon. We've got an illustrious lineup of speakers, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. As you all know, humanitarian needs are at a global high. It's being driven by conflict, which again is at a high, the highest level of conflict since the Second World War. I'm grey enough to remember that 20 years ago we were celebrating that conflict was at a post-Second World War low. What happened in those 20 years? Conflict didn't land from heaven. These are choices made by people and leaders around the world. And so it speaks to our geopolitical moment where we see conflict at a high, but we also see climate change and the climate impact and extreme weather events accelerating. And of course, just as needs are arising, we also see financing under grave pressure, international humanitarian norms and standards being disregarded with impunity. And I've seen that for myself in the last 15 months since I started at Save the Children in visits to places like Somalia, Ethiopia, the West Bank, Sudan, and elsewhere. So this afternoon, we're going to be exploring how we lean into this moment and how we respond. And first up, I'm very, very honored to invite Her Excellency Marapini Ramakgopa, the South African Minister for Planning, to the stage to deliver a keynote address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Am I audible? Thank you very much, Program Director, and thank you for allowing us and organizing this auspicious event where we'll have a good dialogue that is going to shape the next coming decades of how we're going to deal with a number of issues, most especially humanitarian atmosphere. Let me, of course, greet all the excellencies that are here, all the distinguished partners from across government, from business, multilateral institutions, civil society, the philanthropy, and academia, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else that is here. Good day. I am pleased, as a representative from South Africa, to join you to discuss this important topic on the future of the global humanitarian system and the reforms needed to make it more responsive, accountable, equitable, but most of all, sustainable. We are meeting at a time when the global humanitarian landscape is entering a period of profound systematic disruptions, shaping both the strategic environment and the operational demand. Constraints on humanitarian access, escalating security risk, like the Program Director have already alluded to, and the widening funding gaps continue to redefine the capacity and influence of all actors within this system. These dynamics increasingly determine which priorities receive attention, which principles are held, and which constituencies might be left behind. This is happening whilst humanitarian needs worldwide are increasing at an alarming rate. These are, of course, compounded by all the conflicts that we have seen: climate change, economic instability, hunger, displacement, unfortunately, most especially of young women and youth children, pandemics, and poor governance. The reality is that many regions of the world face worsening humanitarian situation every day, unfortunately. Millions of our people around the world are stuck in a vicious cycle of vulnerability and crisis, while the humanitarian system cannot cope with the growing demand. This calls for all of us to take action. What then now becomes that call for action? Unfortunately, at the current moment, the humanitarian system is in its current form. It is no longer completely fit for the challenges ahead. And as I've already said, what we'll be talking about today and having a dialogue on would give effect to decades to come. Although humanitarian organizations do incredible work, and we all agree on that, it is extremely challenging or in extremely challenging humanitarian situation, the increasing complexity of global challenges forces us to reconsider how humanitarian assistance is distributed and provided globally. The priority should always remain people-centric. We must put people first and focus on promoting human rights, dignity, protection, inclusion, and resilience, most especially for those vulnerable communities around the globe. Therefore, humanitarian reforms are not only about transforming humanitarian system, but in the main, they mean that global responses to humanitarian crisis must become more just, but locally based, but we also have to ensure that modalities that will enhance accountability are also introduced. The humanitarian reform agenda must include localization, as I've already said, of humanitarian assistance. The fact is that people impacted by a crisis are not passive recipients of aid. Very often, they are the first responders to emergencies. They are the best at understanding local situation and most invested in rebuilding their lives and livelihood afterwards. We recently had a disaster in South Africa because of climate change, of course, and many villages, there are some villages that were actually wiped off altogether. And of course, by the time we went to them and we got to them, including the global assistance that was there to deal with humanitarian issues, we had found that the local people from churches, local people from small organizations had started organizing themselves and mobilizing around the community to try and find help for each other. It is for this reason that we really do believe that the inclusion of localized structures are quite important. However, despite numerous global commitments to localize humanitarian responses, local actors continue to receive very little funding and are in some instances hardly consulted in decision making. This problem should be addressed. For the humanitarian system to be more effective, it must include local organizations, community structures, women-led groups, youth networks, faith-based institutions, and local authorities, which are enabled through predictable funding, institutional support, so that they can be able to participate in humanitarian responses. As a result, we still reinforce the fact that capacity building must also be at the core of whatever responses that we bring in place. Localization should not be seen solely as a question of efficiency. It must be about justice, responsibility, and definitely sustainability. Additionally, international cooperation and solidarity remain crucial. Localization must go hand in hand with strengthened international partnership and burden, as well as responsibility sharing. Contemporary humanitarian challenges require transnational actions from the international community. As a result, international humanitarian actors must continue to play an integral role in not only financing, but through coordination, protection, technical expertise that I spoke about in terms of capacity building and rapid emergency responses. Let me reiterate that what is needed is stronger and equal partnership based on respect and accountability. It is for this reason that this conference is quite important, because at the core of it, we are talking about global partnership. The humanitarian sector faces a major challenge of protected crises that induce cyclical and prolonged dependency on humanitarian assistance. Humanitarian aid was originally designed to provide a temporary response measure to emergencies. However, today, in many regions of the world, it has become a long-term substitute for development, public services, and socio-economic opportunities. Very often, people affected by recurring conflicts, displacements, and other crises stay in need of humanitarian assistance for several years, sometimes even decades. Clearly, the situation should end. Breaking the vicious cycle requires better coordination between humanitarian systems, as well as development systems and peace-building efforts. We must make sure that humanitarian responses are better aligned with the resilience building, economic inclusion, institution building, and conflict prevention. In my region of Africa where I come from, we've really realized, most especially if you look at the north part, the Sahel region, most of the conflicts and war that they face, especially civil war, are as a result of underdevelopment. So if you're going to be talking about humanitarian aid and dealing with conflict, you also have to put at the center development, because that will also deal with prevention of conflict. Our responses to humanitarian crisis should no longer be limited to addressing their immediate effect, but should also address the structural drivers of vulnerability and instability within regions. Lastly, the impact of climate change significantly compound the challenges faced by the global humanitarian systems. Many African countries and small islands in developing states, which produce a minimal share of global emission, face devastating droughts, floods, food insecurity, displacements, and other adverse impacts, unfortunately. Therefore, adaptation, financing for resilience, disaster reduction, and anticipatory action should become part of the humanitarian agenda, and reforms in line with the already agreed multilateral frameworks as well as commitments. Strengthening accountability is in the global humanitarian system is very crucial, if not the only thing that can keep this sustainable. For more equitable humanitarian responses, the UN80 initiative and the humanitarian research should contribute towards increasing transparency, financing, coordination, reduced duplication, and stronger accountability to affected population. I'll give you one more example, and I think I spoke about it yesterday when we were in plenary. In countries like Mozambique, as well as DRC, we have found that the duplication in terms of humanitarian aid and many other development systems has actually reached to the point of having 250 agencies doing almost the same thing. And as a result, we are unable to can account, but equally so it puts a burden as well on the communities and the systems that are already there locally to be able to carry forward and account accordingly. We must ensure that affected communities have greater say in humanitarian responses that directly affect their lives. At the same time, sustainable and predictable financing becomes increasingly crucial. Growing humanitarian funding gaps and rising humanitarian needs continue to undermine the sustainability of financing models. In this case, innovation is needed in financing, stronger burden sharing, and increased cooperation amongst governments, multilateral institutions, development finance institutions, and the philanthropic and private sector. Furthermore, the humanitarian principles such as neutrality, impartiality, and humanity, as well as independence, independence, must be preserved always, particularly in an increasingly polarized international environment. I think you have alluded to that in a way. Lastly, to conclude, humanitarian reform must aim to restoring dignity, hope, and agency for people affected by humanitarian crisis. It means transforming the humanitarian system into one that not only manages the situation, but also creates conditions for stabilization, peace, and sustainable development. To achieve all this, the goal that we have just spoken about, we need to demonstrate political will, international cooperation, and partnerships with communities affected by crisis. Therefore, it is our collective responsibility, ladies and gentlemen, to ensure that the global humanitarian system adapts to changing realities by focusing more on efficiency, equity, accountability, as well as promotion of locally driven solutions in collaboration with international partners. The task before us is challenging, but it is also achievable. Thank you very much.
Minister Ramaphosa, thank you very much for that keynote address. Now, I think we're going to remove the lectern, and I'm going to invite our illustrious panel to discuss some of those themes that have been introduced by the Honourable Minister over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. Hannon Ahmed, please come on up. Hannon is a humanitarian expert. She initiated the old Omdurman emergency room. Why don't you take a seat over here, please? We're delighted to have you. Welcome. Shika Goyal. Shika is the CEO of the, sorry, I'm standing with my back to the room or back to my guests, but Shika Goyal is the CEO of the Vittel Foundation. Yorg Lauber, please come on up. Yorg is the Vice President of ICRC. Welcome. The Right Honourable Yvette Cooper, the UK Foreign Secretary. Welcome, Yvette. Thank you for giving us your time this afternoon. Catherine Russell, please come on up, the Executive Director of UNICEF. Please. And Carl Scow, who's the Deputy Executive Director of the World Food Programme. Please grab this seat. And excellent. So now the format for this conversation is going to be that I'm going to ask a question of each of our panelists. And so long as they're reasonably brief, I'm hoping we might have a little moment for a bit of comment from the room as well. So let's start with Hannon, if I may. Hannon, you have direct experience as a local responder. I've seen that in action. All of us in this room who've worked on humanitarian issues have seen that in action. Can you say, from your perspective, what are the practical changes that are needed to better support and facilitate local efforts?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the UK government and South Africa government for hosting this and for allowing us to amplify our voices as a local responders. Instead, for your question, in Sudan, local responders did not wait for permission when war broke out. Much of the international system evacuated, but Sudanese neighborhood we organized as a mutual aid groups, kept kitchen running. Women-led group networks create safe spaces. Grassroots volunteers kept basic services going in a place where international actors could not be presented. They built the response while the former system was still trying to understand it. So let me be direct. The question is not how we bring local actors into the humanitarian system. The real question is whether the humanitarian system is willing to change to support the local system already there. Yet, despite local leadership, only 4.3% of the funding went directly to the local actors. In the last cycle, 64% went to the UN, and I'm sorry for that. The system still recognizes local leadership in a language more than funding decision. So here is what, as local as possible, actually requires. One, recognize local responders as decision makers, not just delivery partners. This means local actors need to be in the room where strategy, funding, risk, and program design are decided, not only consulted after decisions are made. Everyone has a voice, and we need to walk the extra mile to listen. Inclusion cannot be a nice to have. It cannot be reduced to this is the best we could do. It has to be a minimum condition of how humanitarian decisions are made. And in the context as divided, as painful as Sudan, we also need to work hard of building bridge between local actors. We need to create spaces for open conversation. We need to bring voices together as where possible, and we need to avoid using division as an opportunity to pass agendas. Sudanese people need honest spaces to speak, disagree, organize, and shape the response together, now more than ever. 2, move resources directly, flexibly, and faster. If we trust the grassroots responders in hardest place, trust them with cash. Simplifies due diligence. 27-hour emergency disbursement. 3, philanthropies alone cannot reach the scale this crisis demands. Government donors, including the FCDO, must now step in, fund what has already been proven, scale what already works. This is not about philanthropy filling gaps forever. It's about philanthropy building the runway and government taking off. 4, share risk instead of transferring it downward. Grassroots actors across checkpoints, they are visible to armed actors. They are stay when others leave. Risk is real. The question is how we share it, not how international actors avoid it. 5, coordinate internationally so local actors don't carry your fragmentation. In Sudan, we have multiple pool funds and intermediaries. Diversity is good, but if they work in isolation, grassroots actors face duplication, gaps, and repeated demands. We need complementarity. 6, treat diaspora and women-led initiative as local. I have been in Chad and in Cairo on the ground, and I watch horrible stories. The Gulf and Europe are moving money and supplies daily. Refugee women in camps are leading protection work. Local is not only geography, it's a trust, proximity, and accountability. 7, put women-led, refugee-led mental health and protection at the center. There are not side issue. They are survival. Fund them as a core, not as added on. Stop extractive consultation. Grassroots responders have been mapped and survive endlessly, but funding never shifts. If you ask for knowledge, be accountable and stop creating bilateral requirements. Ask, are we making local responders work easier or harder? For me, as local as possible, as international as necessary, means moving resources and decision-making closer to communities, sharing risk, building the ecosystem around grassroots responders, not bilateral system above them, and measuring success by how much we are enable local actors to operate safely with dignity. Sudan is showing you another system is already emerging, a true blueprint for future disaster. Mutual aid groups, women-led networks, grassroots volunteers, diaspora responders, they are not waiting for you to invent the future of aid. They are already building it. The question for this panel is simple. Will the FCDO, other international governments and donors and philanthropies system will follow our lead? Thank you.
Thank you, Hannon. You spoke very, very powerfully about the need for the system to change. Shika, may I turn to you? And from your experience, how can innovative partnerships drive locally led humanitarian delivery and involve populations who are on the front lines meaningfully in shaping and implementing solutions?
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you to FCDO, to CIF, to BII, and to the South African government to bring us all here together. So I'll answer this in 2 parts. The first is how partnerships, what we are calling innovative partnerships here, genuinely enable locally led delivery. And then the second part of your question, how do we meaningfully involve, include, engage affected populations, and what does that mean? So let me first start by saying that the humanitarian system does not lack commitments to localizations. I think we have enough declarations, compacts, frameworks, and reform language around it already. What the real challenge is implementation. So too often what we see is that in principle, we all agree that locally led leadership is important. But the way the funding happens, the risk, compliance, governance, all of those structures actually work completely against it. So when we talk about innovative partnerships, the innovation is definitely not technical. It is more institutional. So it is more about how do we change how resources move, how risks are shared more fairly, and how governance structures are designed so that what we were talking about, affected populations, have a meaningful role. And we keep talking about local leadership and what it is. It is not theoretical, absolutely not. In many crises, local and community-based organizations are central to the response. They are the first ones to respond, they are closest to the needs, and they have the trust of the affected populations. So the real question is not whether they can lead. The real question really is if the international system is ready to support that leadership in a very serious and sustained way. And Sudan, of course, is a great example and has shown us this. The emergency response rooms came out of the communities themselves. And today they provide health, education, security, and many other essential services in some very, very difficult circumstances. Now, philanthropy was able to provide some early and direct support to these emergency response rooms when they were still outside of the formal system. And this early support was quite important because it came at a very critical time. It gave these community-led organizations ability to coordinate amongst themselves, to demonstrate impact, and also grow into a wider network. And over time, this wider network has attracted funding from a wide variety of institutional funders as well. So I think that's what we see as philanthropy's catalytic role, where philanthropy can come in early, take some informed risks, and really back locally led models before they are recognized by the formal system. But while I say this, I think philanthropy should not be treated as a substitute for public funds. In fact, it should be the other way around, and especially not in a time where aid is reducing. So our value is quite different as philanthropy. As I said, we can invest in the enabling conditions of locally led initiatives. So it could be community-based pooled funds. It could be evidence generation. It could be anticipatory action. But we cannot replace public funds. And at the same time, I think public funds, UN agencies, multilaterals have an equally important role. What you guys bring in terms of scale, policy influence, contact with the governments, and most importantly, the ability to change the rules of the system itself, I think it's unparalleled. So when we bring these groups together, that's what a true partnership looks like. And I think for that to happen, we absolutely need two things to do first. The first one is we need to reform existing mechanisms. So what do we mean by that? That definitely is like the pooled funds, the UN-led funds. They must actually become accessible for local and national actors. Today we heard in the roundtable before that last year UN-led funds, country-based UN-led funds were 50%, and this year it's gone to 15%. And the reason given was because we wanted to be faster and efficient. That's not good enough. That's not what we should be doing anymore. So what does it really mean in terms of it being truly accessible? It means more direct funding. It means more flexible funding. It means proportionate risk allocation. And it means governance engagements where local actors have real influence. I think the second thing is that we need to invest in alternatives where the existing system is not changing fast enough. And these could be feminist funds. These would be community accountability platforms, which we have to stop seeing those things as peripheral and make them an integral part of a responsive humanitarian system. I'll come to the second part of the question. I know we are short on time. The role of effective population. I think we need to be clear that meaningful involvement, and a few other people have said about it, has to be more than consultation. Consultation is important, but not when the key decisions are being made elsewhere. So the affected populations have to be engaged and involved earlier on and more substantively, right from program design, program delivery, resource allocation, monitoring evaluation, and then holding the institutions accountable. These include women-led organizations, youth-led groups, refugee-led organizations, and many other groups who are all very close to both the risks and the solutions. And I think this is quite central to the protection angle as well, which we all have been talking about over the last 2 days. Community often understands the risks of exclusion, of exploitation, of violence, way before many other external actors do. And when actually community-led organizations and women-led organizations have a meaningful role in developing our humanitarian response, it not only becomes locally led, it actually becomes more secure, more stable, and more sustainable. So for us, as VTOL Foundation, the test of an innovative partnership is not only how much funding it mobilizes. It very much is whether it improves the way decisions are made and the way the resources are allocated. So does it make funding more direct and flexible? Does it share risk more fairly? Does it enable governments, institutions, agencies to respond faster and more effectively to crisis? Unfortunately, I think we are all meeting at a moment of exceptional pressure. The needs are rising and our resources are constrained. And this is a time when temptation would be highest to go back to our familiar systems, to control and to centralize. But this is exactly the time for reform. My closing point would be very simple. Locally led humanitarian action is already happening. The task is not to invent it. It is to resource it, to recognize it, and then to build systems that allow it to operate at scale. And innovative partnerships, as we were talking about, if we combine the agility and risk appetite of philanthropy, the scale and policy influence of public institutions, and the leadership and legitimacy of local leaders, we can absolutely move away from commitments to delivery and from consultation to genuine participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shika. Thank you. Let me turn to Yorg, because the ICRC has a very particular role in the system, both mandated in international law, but also on the ground. Given that positioning, how do you navigate local as possible? And we've heard both Hannon and Shika talk very powerfully about people on the ground as the first responders and the need to back that. What's the role of ICRC in trying to back the shift in the system that we're calling for?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question, but thanks to our co-hosts for this great event and for giving the ICRC an opportunity to add the voice to the discussion. Let me start as local as possible. I'm not going to contest that. It's clear that no international actor is ever first to arrive at the crisis. Local communities are the true first responders, families, volunteers, women associations, etc. They are there. I would like to remind you, however, that the ICRC was created about 160 plus years ago precisely to support local actors to provide medical assistance across front lines. And the history, in our case, of 160 plus years tells us that humanitarian action is strongest when it works through partnership and complementarity. We do this within the movement, you know, the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, the Federation, the national societies, the ICRC. And I want to address these other questions. Where do we feel, from our perspective, that international is necessary, has an added value? Usually, and you mentioned some of that, we think it's about scaling up and bringing in expertise to support the local-led response to crisis. We in the ICRC do this, for instance, through bringing specialist surgical teams, forensic expertise, capacity building when it's about tracing, looking after missing persons, water and sanitation engineering. We also do that. But then there is this element where we feel that international is necessary. And let me explain. Conflicts always, I think, result in a situation of extreme polarization. Everyone, being it party to the conflict or actors acting within a conflict zone, is expected, forced to take sides. And everyone, whether local or international, can be caught in the crosshairs, and is so currently more and more, of political and military tensions. Yet we, the ICRC, we strive to preserve within this complicated pressures and contexts, preserve a space for neutral and independent humanitarian action. We need to do so. It's our mandate. It's written in the Geneva Conventions, but it's also the condition sine qua non for our operations. Neutrality and independence are not just abstract. They are really conditions that enable us to access people in some of the world's most dangerous and complex environments, where trust with armed forces is fragile. For instance, when we want to visit detainees, when we want to support prisoners, when we work on hostage releases, when we try to reconnect families, you need to have this independence, you need to be perceived as neutral, you need to have the trust of those who are in the situation. These activities, again, are important on their own right, to be able to go to prisoners, etc. But they also serve in creating a space. They allow us to do some confidence building, which then gives space to us and others to build on for their own efforts. Now, our role and our mandate in upholding international humanitarian law and its specific duties under the Geneva Conventions to assist and protect conflict-affected populations are a unique feature and I believe a value add, and that's where I think is the element of international, we as an international operating organization is important. Any humanitarian reform needs to maintain the respect for the laws at war, the laws in war at its heart. This means standing alongside communities and local actors to monitor and remind armed actors, state and non-state, of their legal obligations. It means protecting populations, but also creating the space for local actors, including national societies, to work safely in increasingly deadly environments. This means ensuring commitments made in the Geneva Conventions to access populations and conduct visits to detainees are upheld. This is important at the local level, but also at the national and international level. The ICRC engages with states on maintaining and strengthening international humanitarian law as a collective responsibility, not only as a humanitarian imperative. This serves a long-term interest. It's about very specific measures, but it's also about preserving humanity, profound values as a whole. Because the respect of international humanitarian law is so essential, we, together with 6 founding states in September of 2024, started a global international humanitarian law initiative. It was the 6 founding states are South Africa, Brazil, China, France, Jordan, and Kazakhstan. There are basically 2 objectives in this initiative. One, we want to make IHL a political priority at the global, regional, and national levels. And 2, we want to develop a menu of practical recommendations to address the most pressing humanitarian challenges in contemporary warfare and turn political commitment into concrete change on the ground. The process will end in December this year with a conference in Amman. So far, 111 states have subscribed to this initiative, and I want to recognize again the 2 co-hosts for their role. South Africa, I mentioned as a co-founder, the UK as a very active member. And interesting in our discussion about localization, the UK is co-chairing a work stream in this preparation, in this initiative on national IHL committees, exploring how these important domestic bodies can be supported in their support towards the government to better respect IHL. For those state representatives here, if you're not among the 111, we call upon you all to join the initiative. So, just as a final remark, what I tried to explain in the beginning, we very much understand the need or the importance of local actors. We can't fulfill our mandate without the support, the cooperation of local actors. We believe there's an element of international that we bring as an added value. Fantastic. I see you being nervous about time. I want to finish here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yorg. Thank you very much for that. Let me turn next to Yvette. Yorg broadened out the conversation from the conduct of humanitarian operations to actually how these are situated in wider issues around laws of war, international norms, human rights, and so on. Can you say a little bit about how countries like the UK, noting the kind of devastating conflicts that we've seen play out in Gaza, Sudan, that we've already talked about, Ukraine, elsewhere, what can countries like the UK do to reduce harm, to protect better civilians, and uphold international law at this time when actually we see those really under grave, grave pressure?
Yeah. And can I just start as well by saying, again, to thank you to South Africa for co-hosting with us, and also thank you to everybody for being here and being part of what we see as being a hugely important global partnerships conference. And look, I suppose, I mean, we've already covered from her talked about the local importance of the local response, the importance of the coordination, including around international humanitarian law. So let me just, I think, maybe pick up on the part of your question you specifically referred to Gaza and Sudan as some of the areas where we're facing now the most acute and dire humanitarian crises, and what the issues, I think, are there. And I think, look, if you start, I mean, I am deeply worried about the escalating humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And I think after the 20-point plan was agreed, after the ceasefire, there was some progress being made, but now it feels as though that is now so fragile and there is a risk of really badly going backwards again. And this is about really, look, we've got our shared fundamental principles, wherever we're talking about in the world, the shared fundamental principles around our shared humanity and those basic humanitarian needs, the international humanitarian law, all of those sorts of things that are the underpinnings. And as part of the 20-point plan, obviously there was agreement for a significant increase in the humanitarian support. But where we are now, obviously still got 1.9 million Palestinians in Gaza who are displaced from their homes. We're still not getting the shelter in that we need. We've still got, we've had a reduction in the trucks that are crossing now. So I think we're on about broadly half the levels of trucks going into Gaza that there were even at the end of last year, and considerably lower than the commitments that were made. And that also means now we've obviously been through the flooding and the winter conditions. We've got now very serious water and sanitation issues now, with, I think, the majority of people in Gaza unable to get the level of sort of clean water that they need each day, and children sleeping in the most horrendous conditions. And so I think, look, the continued Israeli government restrictions on crossings and on basic supplies like the medical, emergency medical supplies, and even pest control issues that are badly needed, are completely indefensible and wrong, and need to be lifted so we can get all of the crossings through. I've been to Jordan to see some of the warehouses with UK aid. You've got row after row of UK aid that is not getting through because the crossing and the Jordan route into Gaza is still closed. We also need the liftings of the rules so that we don't have the registration rules around the many of the charities and agencies that have been working, and support for UNRWA, which does such a crucial work there in Gaza as well. But I think in terms of what is it that the UK, other countries can do? We're obviously continuing to fund, and Gaza is one of our priority areas for humanitarian funding. What I actually think we need is a new push behind the 20-point plan. We need a renewed energy and surge of international diplomacy around the 20-point plan now. Of course, that includes things like we have to see progress being made on disarmament. We have to see progress being made on the Palestinian Committee to be able to work with the Palestinian Authority to be able to operate within Gaza, because Palestine has to be run by Palestinians. But the humanitarian support
should be unconditional. That's not dependent on any of the other things. That's part of phase one. The humanitarian support needs to be unconditional, and that, I think, is what we need, is that coordinated pressure to make sure that you can get that basic support in. Because fundamentally, look, for us, this is part of the broader two-state solution, and really that is the only way to provide security for Israelis and Palestinians alike. I think you think then to just say something about Sudan, and I've been raising Sudan continually in a whole series of international forums, because I don't think Sudan has had the international focus that it needs, given the scale of humanitarian crisis that is taking place there, where you have millions of people still at risk of famine and acute hunger, and also some of the horrendous atrocities that we have seen taking place, and particularly the scale of sexual violence and the way in which rape is being normalized as a weapon of war and being continually used. So we've obviously had the report into El Fasher, the UN fact-finding report on El Fasher, which listed some truly horrendous atrocities that had taken place. We've got the work around accountability being pursued through the UN as well. But fundamentally, you've also got the two warring sides, RSF and SAF, who are restricting humanitarian access, and who are putting restrictions on humanitarian agencies, making it very hard for them to operate. It's fundamentally morally wrong. So Hannon's talked about the emergency response rooms that are doing the most phenomenal job. I mean, a huge tribute to them, but they also ought to be able to get more support from the outside agencies to be able to provide and reach them with support, and that is not possible because of the way in which some of the two warring parties are still both including these restrictions. So I think we need on Sudan, as well as obviously the continued humanitarian support and many of the reforms that our other panellists have talked about, what we also need is the same sense of international energy that we had around Gaza in the autumn to be around Sudan, and around getting to a humanitarian truce, getting to a ceasefire, and so that, frankly, the world listens to the women of Sudan who have been talking about their experiences, and not to the military men who perpetuate that war. And so alongside, we have to always do the humanitarian reforms, and I'll say a bit more about that at the end, but also the diplomacy that helps deliver the peace, the conditions, the humanitarian respect that then also makes it possible for the most basic needs to be met.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments, Yvette. You brought to life the words that we use and the realities on the ground that we're having to try to navigate. Let me turn to Catherine and Carl. Senior positions in two very, very important UN agencies that are involved in operational delivery, trying to navigate these organizational issues that we face. How do we support local response, back local responders, but equally, how do we mobilize the international system? We've got a UN 80 reform process, we've got the humanitarian reset, and so on. What is the role that UNICEF and WFP can play in leaning into this moment?
Well, a few small challenges for sure, but I do appreciate the comments that the Foreign Secretary made, because it does put this into context, in terms of what we're trying to deal with. And essentially, there are just endless conflicts. They just keep adding conflicts to the list. Nothing ever seems to come off our list, so we're just really stretched. I think we estimate 1 in 5 children lives in a conflict zone right now, or is fleeing from a conflict zone, and you can imagine what that means for their lives. So I think the important point here, I think, with this panel is that you see that organizations play really different roles. Certainly from the UN perspective, and I don't want to speak for Carl, because Carl can well speak for himself, but the system is under enormous strain, and I think we are, as you mentioned, we have internal reforms going on. We have a lack of resources. We had a lack of resources before. We're now even under much more enormous pressure. UNICEF cut our sort of operations by about 20% last year in the face of all of these enormous challenges for children. So the challenges are just daunting, to say the least. I think, we are very focused at UNICEF on working closely with our local partners. Why? First, obviously, we support what they're doing, but more important, what we are trying to do at UNICEF is build the capacity of local actors. That's local governments who are the duty bearers to their children. They have a responsibility to educate, protect, take care of the health care of their children. We are trying to build their capacity to do that. That includes local organizations, and we try to do as much support for them as we can, always pushing to do more, pushing to do support for women-led organizations for sure. About 44% of our resources go to local organizations. So I think this point about when you look at the small number that goes directly to local organizations, that is an absolutely fair criticism. But the UN agencies also push a lot of resources and support to local organizations. There are things that really the UN, I think, is important. First, we bring global scale, and we bring, I think, the experience and the normative leadership, which is very, very important in these situations. Sometimes local actors are constrained from doing that. We can go in and say, look, you have to take care of girls, and you have to make sure that women have opportunities. You have to protect minorities. You have to protect children with disabilities, and that can sometimes be harder for some of the local organizations to do. We do quality assurance. We do data, risk analysis, innovative finance. All of that comes with the big organizations, which I think is really critical. We do have an important role in vaccines and therapeutic food, anticipatory financing, integrated supply chains, which our two organizations work really closely on, really with Carl's leadership on that. Shared analysis, like the IPC that somebody mentioned, of, where we know that there are risks of famine and other issues. So I think that the point here is that everybody here has a different role to play, and the magic of it when it works is that we all work together and we're all trying to move in the same direction. These are really big, complicated issues and complicated organizations, so I can't say it always works that way, but that's the goal, and that's what we're all trying to get done.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Catherine. Carl.
Yeah. Well, let me also first say thank you to the Foreign Secretary for kind of adding, the flavor of what we're talking about here. And I mean, on all the context you touch upon, we have exactly the same talking points. We share exactly the same view also on the way forward here. But how you concluded as well, what is really needed here is diplomacy and political energy. Because 70 to 80% of the hunger in the world is driven by conflict. Mm-hmm. And so, the focus really needs to be to end these conflicts, to achieve ceasefires, and certainly prevent new ones, because we can't handle anything more. Mm-hmm. And so that would be my first point. I think you eloquently, painted the context that we have. We have historic numbers of needs. 300 million people acutely food insecure. When we got the Nobel Peace Prize 5 years ago, it was 100 million. So, when that was recognized, since then, 5 years, threefold in terms of needs. And last year, we had 2 famines confirmed for the first time in decades. So historic levels of hunger. At the same time, the funding is dropping. For WFP, a 40% drop last year, year on year. We had to lay off some 5,000 colleagues, but more importantly, we've cut our programs in Somalia, in South Sudan, in Afghanistan to the bare minimum. And we are really choosing, between, it's what we say is, we take from the hungry to give to the starving. Mm. And what happens then is we know that next year there will be a larger starving category. But not only that, it's also the complexities. And this talk about challenges to the rules-based order, we feel that concretely, whether it is to negotiate some conditions with donors or at the checkpoints. It's never been more dangerous to be a humanitarian right now. So we certainly need to change to kind of narrow this gap between needs and what we manage to do about it. And so fundamental change is needed. And at the center of that change is localization, the discussion we've had here all day today. And WFP is fundamentally committed to this. It's our #1 priority. It is at the center of our new strategic plan. We have a new policy, but it goes far beyond that. It is what you said. We need to change our structures, our funding models, and frankly, it's about accountability. Our country directors will be measured against how far they take this agenda in the years to come, and that's where their career will depend, if you will. Secondly, we need to build on what we're already doing. Like Kathy said, 50% of our resources already directly flow into local partners. 80% of our procurement is locally done, including on the food. So it's not like we're starting from scratch. I think also the concept here of localization, there's a lot of talk of local NGOs, critical, no doubt about that. but it's broader than that, and not least local authorities. I mean, we need to build capacities at the local level to handle some of these challenges themselves. And finally, my final point is really on changing the mindset. I mean, I hear colleagues talk about we have been in this country 30, 40 years as if it's a good thing. No, that needs to be done. We should always, from the start, work ourselves out of that. But I think what's important here is also the complementarity. I was just in Darfur for a week. All the local partners I spoke to want a scaled-up UN response in Darfur, partly because of the scale. In the Tawila camp, the trust, those who managed to survive the trust is in Al-Fashir that the Secretary spoke of. They have ended up in a camp where the basics are not provided. So to get to scale, but also what Yorg talked about, the humanitarian space, the protection. They need international presence there to deal with all these different groups that are trying to interfere with the assistance. I think also scale and speed. The minister from Lebanon is here. At the start of the war, within the first 48 hours, we worked closely with her ministry to respond to the shelters, tens of thousands of people, and then we worked based on national systems to scale up also cash support to those hundreds of thousands who were displaced. So I think it is an element here of complementarity and finding what works. And my final point would just be on funding and money. I mean, we can talk about these concepts as much as we want, but ultimately also there needs to be resources to respond. And here, we need a reset and find a way to turn the tide on the funding to this system.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much, Carl. Now, my program says that we can run till 3:10, he says, looking around. Yes? Okay. So I'm going to ask for a couple of interventions from the floor. But you've got to be very, very brief because I want to come back to the panel to close things out. So very brief indeed. I've got two here already. Please go ahead. This gentleman here.
Hi.
Brief comment, please.
Hi, Fergus from Catholic Caritas, England and Wales. Thanks very much for the interventions. Your Excellency, you spoke at the very beginning around the role of faith-based actors. It is the churches, it's the mosques, it's the temples who are the first responders. They are often the only responders. I'd be interested to hear from the panel around that role that you have of faith actors, but also the work of faith leaders to bring peace, to find those ways of communities coming together.
Thank you very much. This lady at the back. Thank you.
Thank you. I love the mix of local organisations, councils and NGOs and the comments that were made at the beginning about women. To what extent is this about building capacity in those local authorities and councils and enabling female leadership?
Great, thank you. And I can take one more. I have a lady here, please.
Hi, we're obviously...
Please say who you are.
Oh, sorry, Helen from the CDAC network and Safe AI team. We're interested in what innovations people are using to try to achieve these efficiencies and what we're optimising for when we define efficiency.
Okay, very good, thank you. So, panel, you've heard from each other, as well as the South African minister, and a couple of comments from the floor. We're clearly in a very, very difficult moment. Incredible needs, incredible pressures. We've all been on the ground. We've seen what we're living through in this very difficult moment. And we need to find that right combination of local and international to try and respond to this. So I'm going to go back down the panel and invite you to make a closing observation on how we go forward from this room. And Yvette, I'll come to you last, if I may. Hannon, please.
Okay, I have seen a lot of you in different high-level events since 2023. And I have been speaking about this many times, changing examples, changing the thoughts due to the situation going on the ground. And I'm changing my suits as well. But I never seen any action change. And I hope that there is an action made by the two governments and other international donors as soon as possible. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Shika.
I think it's what I was talking about. It's again, as Haneen said, we are talking about it. We're talking about our commitment. Let's all agree we are committed to this. So let's start doing it and play our roles. Like, we all have different advantages and skills. So let's play to the advantage of those skills. Us coming with early and risk capital, coming with scale and policy influence, local leadership with legitimacy. Let's all work together because we are all aligned. So let's stop talking about are we aligned or not, and let's do something.
Thank you.
Very much along the same lines. Catherine also mentioned how it works when the orchestra is well tuned, then we can have a collective best impact. On innovation, to be honest, I think we are very much concerned about the impact of new technologies in the battlefield, but also how civilians are drawn into war by the new technology, and that needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Catherine?
I would say a couple things. One, we are just at a time of unbelievable geopolitical change. There are questions about the value of the multilateral system, which I think is putting us all to the test. And I think there is a huge lack of resources, all very problematic. The humanitarian world is essentially picking up the pieces when the political world fails. And we are really strained, and the political world needs to do better, honestly. They need to figure out ways to solve these problems, because we are not able ultimately to save all the lives we need to save. And we will all be judged in the future by how we served the children who are in desperate need around the world. And I think we, right now, are falling behind.
I agree. Carl?
Yeah, it feels often that we are kind of at the crossroads, and on a daily basis we have to choose between bad options. We're faced with impossible dilemmas. I said before about choosing between the hungry and the starving, but also in terms of making pragmatic decisions, short term to save lives, which has implications on our principal stand long term. So we need to come together. This is too much of a challenge for anyone to figure out on their own, whether it's a UN agency or a local NGO. So I think it's a call for coming together, and as you said, Kathy, to make sure that we draw on the toolbox in a coherent and efficient way.
Thank you very much. Yvette, as our co-host.
Yeah, I would just, I think, first just respond to the contributions that we had, and then maybe just make some closing remarks to thank everybody. So I completely agree. I think the potential for faith groups and organisations as leaders within communities can be huge. I would also say, actually, in terms of the sort of philanthropy and donations, actually it is very often faith groups in donor countries that are the ones that are responding most swiftly when there is a humanitarian crisis elsewhere in the world. On the local capacity issues, I mean, absolutely, definitely, it is exactly about capacity building, and particularly about making sure there are much stronger voices for women in local communities. It's your best chance of getting both the humanitarian support that's needed and also peace and security if you mobilise and support and empower women. And then on the technology issues, so I think, I share there's huge risks around the way in which technology is escalating conflict and so on. So, but we also have to think about how we can use technology actually to help us, and whether that is using AI in different ways, whether it's making sure that we do that safely. There's huge potential to also use technology in every way that we can as well. So I suppose I just wanted to finish then with some just final thoughts as to thank the panel. Part of the reason we wanted to hold this Global Partnerships Conference was exactly because we have such increased volatility all over the world, increasing challenges and humanitarian crises and development challenges, but we also know that we have still that determination to pursue those shared values that we have, to pursue the lifting people out of poverty, being able to respond to the kinds of humanitarian crises, but we need to do it in new ways. And we need to work together in different ways, and that's what I think all of these discussions are about. I suppose I would highlight, just thinking about this, would be issues around power, issues around protection, and then also issues around partnerships as being the sort of themes to think about as part of this. On the power, we absolutely have to make sure when we are responding to humanitarian crises, we are empowering those in local communities to be able to respond. We've increased our funding for the emergency response rooms in Sudan
but we need to be able to build that capacity and to go further and recognise that we shouldn't be seeing people in local communities simply as victims or survivors of conflict. They are the first responders. They are the people who actually will have the networks on the ground, know where the responses are needed, and we need to be able to be working with people and supporting them, and particularly, as I said, making sure that we are empowering women as part of that. Secondly, I think we must not lose sight of protection and the protections against abuse. That includes the protection against sexual violence, which we have seen escalating in conflict. It also includes some of the broader international humanitarian law protections and the crucial nature and the risks, and particularly for children. I think we are still not doing enough around the safeguarding of children and the support for children in conflict, and considering the consequences, the long-term consequences there as well. And then in terms of the partnerships, of course, we know that there are pressures on funding. We have had to make difficult decisions here in the UK, but we made the decision not to walk away from overseas development assistance, not to work away from that international work, but actually to hold this conference, exactly because we believe it is so important that although our funding may be lower, we are so determined to mobilise more private finance, to mobilise more international finance, to use it in the most effective way possible, and to use that funding in partnership to deliver the most effective results. That does mean we also have to do things like the UN 80 reforms, the kinds of reforms that Tom Fletcher has set out that we need to do as part of making sure we can get the most effective response, the most targeted response. But then I would just come back to that all of this has to be alongside the diplomacy and the foreign policy. The development work and the humanitarian response is a central part of our foreign policy. It's not an add-on and a parallel that goes alongside it. It's a central part of it. It's why we are prioritising the conflict resolution, and I spend more time on than on anything else on Ukraine, on Sudan, and on Israel-Palestine, and on now, of course, on Iran and the Straits of Hormuz, and the issues that are always about what do you do to deal with the consequences, but also what do you do to deal with the causes. For us, that means, of course, though, not just linking about the conflict issues and how we respond to those, but also as we look forward, and the Strait of Hormuz, I think, really highlights this, we have to think about the economic resilience for countries across the world, because the fragility of countries when it comes to climate shocks, or when it comes to conflict, or when it comes to economic shocks like the restrictions on the Strait of Hormuz, which are linked to Iran's decision to hijack the global economy, and linked to what is happening in the Middle East. But with all of those, if countries are more vulnerable and less resilient, it means that when shocks happen, you are far more likely to end up in the worst kinds of humanitarian crisis as well. So I think alongside those principles of reform around empowerment, around protection, around partnerships, what we also need to do is think long-term about resilience, because it's our resilience to crises in the future that also needs to be what holds us together. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Yvette. Thank you. It's been a fabulous discussion, a very rich discussion. I think from my perspective at Save the Children, there are 6 things that really resonate here. Localize, we're all committed to that. Anticipate, so we're not just dealing with those who are bleeding out, but actually who are on the ward and heading towards the emergency room. Partnerships, we've all got a role to play. We need to build those partnerships. Funding, because actually we need the resources to meet the moment. And then this idea of humanitarian diplomacy, how do we actually lift the need for humanitarian diplomacy, access and IHL and dealing with atrocities out of the geopolitical space, because it's desperately mired. And I think that's a really, really critical, urgent need of the day. And then just lastly, all the international commitments are out there, and they broadly say the right thing. We need to get on and do this stuff. So a big round of applause to our fantastic panel, please.
the instruments that come with that, and then stepping back, right? So this catalytic approach, but there is clearly a role here. And then we must not forget the demand side, which we have heard about, the importance of working on the project side, developing projects that are of good quality, bankable, and where domestic capital can then flow. So we've heard, I believe, about successful, about replicable, about scalable solutions. And now, so the call is really on all those here to scale, replicate, and make it a success through partnerships. So thank you very much to this panel and everybody else this afternoon.
Thank you very much for an excellent panel. Thank you so much. Colleagues, that was a rich discussion packed with detail. You probably want to stretch your legs a little bit, but can I ask you to remain close because we'll be shortly starting our session with the Foreign Secretary and Minister Yvette Cooper. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome to Ending Violence Against Women and Girls. Please take your seats. Please take your seats.
Welcome back. We are at our penultimate session for today. We're going to change the conversation somewhat. We've talked about money, we've talked about innovation, and now we're going to talk about making sure partnership delivers for all, benefits all, including women and girls. And it's a priority for the UK. It's a priority for our Foreign Secretary, and this afternoon we're going to drill down to a specific issue around violence against women and girls. And it's a priority for us to ensure that we shine a spotlight on it, that we try and stop it, and that we hold people accountable for it. So today's session, we're going to look at driving political momentum, highlighting different solutions, and also strengthening collective action. I'd like to invite the SIF CEO, Kate Hampton, to the stage, who's going to be our moderator and take us through the session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and as we come to the close of this conference, it's my privilege to host this session. It's really important that we put women and girls at front and center, because ultimately when we talk about development cooperation, we're talking about the people that all of us serve. My name is Kate Hampton. I was introduced, so I won't bore you with the rest. But I think it's important to remember that 1 in 3 women over the age of 15 have been subjected to physical or sexual violence, non-partner violence, or both, at least once in their lifetime. If this was a representative sample of the world's population, look around you and think about how many people in this room would have and probably have faced that kind of violence. As the world's largest children-focused philanthropy, we believe that gender-based violence is an intergenerational challenge, and violence against women is deeply connected to violence against children. In fact, children that live in households where a mother experiences intimate partner violence are significantly more likely to experience violent discipline themselves and perpetrate violence in the future. And girls that experience sexual violence in childhood are much more likely to experience sexual violence again in adulthood. So this is not just a profound human rights violation, it's a systemic barrier to societal well-being, economic growth, social stability, and sustainable development. Many of the people in this room were probably with us at the first ministerial on ending violence against children and know the cost to society. Violence, like malnutrition, perpetuates difficulties in all aspects of life, work, health, and so on. So today is about agency, it's about what we can do together, and I'm very fortunate now to introduce the UK Foreign Secretary, the Right Honourable Yvette Cooper, who is going to join us as one of the many leaders in this room dedicated to driving change.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Kate for introducing today's session, and to SIF for its formidable leadership in ending violence against children. So I, in February, went to the Chad-Sudan border and to the refugee camp there, Adre. There is mostly women and children there. And one of the young women said to me that most of the women that she knew in the camp had suffered what she called bad violence on the way there. But hardly anyone spoke about it because of the shame and the fear. And that was how she described her experiences and her friends' experiences. And survivors of the sexual assaults, the violence, rape used as a weapon of war will
bear those scars and face that trauma for very many years to come. And yet for too long, the rest of the world has looked away. We must not and we cannot do that. And one of the things that we want to do as part of the campaign that we're launching today is to make sure that we can shine a spotlight on the experiences of the women of Sudan, but shine a spotlight on the violence against women and girls across the world that too often is holding half the population back. My colleague Jess Phillips, who many of you will know, will stand in the House of Commons each year around International Women's Day and read out the names of every woman murdered by a man in Britain over the past 12 months. This year, there were 95 names. It took Jess 5 minutes to read all of them. And the unbearable truth is this, that if Jess read out all of the names for women all over the world, murdered by men, it would take her 3 days. And that's why we need global action to tackle this crisis and a global coalition to do so. Violence against women and girls happens everywhere, in homes, online, in conflict and displacement. But no society can thrive when so many of the population are unable to live in freedom from fear. And that's why I've made advancing the rights of women and girls a foreign policy priority for the UK. It's why I'm pleased to announce today a new international strategic framework on women and girls that looks at economic participation and equality, on political participation and equality, on education, on healthcare, on the opportunities for the future that we want to see championed all over the world, but too often where we have seen progress go backwards. But we know that underpinning opportunities, safety and security have to be the bedrock. And that's why domestically here in the UK, we have set an unprecedented mission to halve violence against women and girls in a decade. But it's also why we want that mission to be global. It's why we want to work internationally, because we know we cannot meet this challenge alone. And so today, alongside the governments of Australia, Brazil, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Jamaica, Morocco, South Africa, and Spain, we are launching today a new international coalition on ending violence against women and girls. A historic coalition showing a genuine global partnership to turn commitment into action. So we develop national pledges as coalition members, setting out what each of us will be doing at home and internationally based on what we know works, and so we can share together and learn from each other. Part of the reason I wanted to do this is because a year ago, I went to Spain to see the work that they were doing and the leading work that they had been doing on tackling domestic abuse in Spain over the last 20 years. That work has inspired some of the work that we are doing here in the UK, but then I was really pleased that the Spanish Minister for International Cooperation was able to come with me yesterday to see some of the work that the police in London are doing in order to be able to tackle violence against women and girls and domestic abuse here. So countries able to learn from each other about what we do at home, because it is the partnerships that we build abroad that make us stronger at home. So we will also create a new campaign that leads to tangible action based on the evidence of what works, tackling violence in all its forms, online, offline, in conflict and in peace, and build towards a global summit next year while the UK is chairing the G20, designed to bring together governments, business, civil society and survivors together to turn momentum into lasting change. And crucially, this campaign must be grounded in lived experiences, because solutions designed without survivors are never solutions at all. So we will also establish a survivor advisory board to shape this work, challenge our assumptions and help make a real difference. But ultimately, this campaign will only succeed if it feels like something we are building together. Women and men across the world coming together. Ending violence against women and girls is about unlocking human potential, building stronger economies, and delivering a lasting peace. And so this campaign is a call for us to work together and move faster, because in doing so, we can build societies that are safer, fast and fairer, and better for everyone. And so, to begin our discussions today, I wanted to introduce someone who knows firsthand why this work matters, and whose incredible work and her fight for Raneem's law here in the UK reminds us of what is at stake and why having the courage to act is so important. So please join me in welcoming a good friend of mine and an inspiration to me, Noor Norris.
Hi, good evening. Today I'll be bringing with me Khawla and Raneem into this room. Not only as victims, not only as names in the law, but as partner of this global call for action. Their stories carries pain, but not only that, but also carries purpose. Their legacy now belongs to the wider movement. We all want to save women and girls. We all wish we could reach them before it's too late, before the tragedy takes place, before the final call. When a family loses their loved ones, and if you ask them what's the most difficult thing, we all think that losing their loved ones. But reality is, another pain never leaves. It's knowing how horrific and how painful their tragedy has been on their loved ones, the horror they've been through, their final moment before they lost their lives. For me, that pain has two names, Khawla and Raneem. Raneem was my niece. She was 22 years old. She had dreams, future, and a life she deserved to live. Khawla was my sister. She was her mother. And like so many mothers, she tried to protect her child. She stood between her daughter and danger and lost her life too. But what I carry with me is not only how they died. Their fear did not begin in the final moment. For 2.5 hours, they called for help, but the system sent them back to their danger, where their children heard their last final words and screams. That night, after they were killed, I fell into my knees and made them a promise. I would not let their voice be buried. I will not let their voice be buried with them. I would fight for justice, not only for the man who took their lives, but also against the system, against anyone who has failed them and failed any victim. I was not prepared for what I discovered at the inquest. What we were facing was not one mistake. It was a complete system failing of domestic abuse. Was horrific. And I knew Raneem and Khawla were not alone. Too many women and girls were facing the same fate. But today, standing in this room, I no longer call it only a national crisis. Today, I call what we are in is international crisis, a pandemic of violence against women and girls. Because violence against women and girls is not limited to one country, one culture, one community, or one system. Women around the world not always safe, home, on the street, online, and too often they are not even safe after asking for help. Therefore, tackling it alone, which is no longer possible. And where we face a pandemic, we do not respond only. We unite, we share knowledge, we move resources, we listen to evidence, we act urgently, we protect life. That is a spirit I bring today into the room, unity. If Khawla and Raneem were here today in the room and I asked them, would you exchange Raneem's law to come back? I know what my heart would want. I want them back, every family would. But also I also believe that they will look at the women and girls who may now be protected because of their story, because of the way things are. Because they will say to me, let this law save others, let our name become a protection, let other women be believed earlier, let another child keep their mother. That's why Raneem's laws matters. It's not only a law, it's a message. But we must also name violence early and clearly. Domestic abuse, honor abuse, coercive control, stalking, harassment, sexual abuse, and so on. They are not separate issues. They are the heart of all. That's why your presence here is really important. You have traveled from across the world to be part of this conversation, this partnership, this shared responsibility. And I believe you are here because you want to make those changes. So today, I thank you, not only for listening, but being part of this global movement that can help turn pain into protection and law into life-saving actions. Raneem's law should not be the end of story. It should be part of the exchange. The United Kingdom has taken an important step, and I am proud of that. But this work belongs to all of us because the women's live in fear tonight. They don't want to hear a speech. She will need global policy. One day, none of us will be here, but we will leave behind something very valuable. But what we will leave behind will speak for us. Not speech protection, not promise change. A world where women and children are safe because today we choose unity. Let's build protection before tragedy. Khawla and Raneem and other women and girls cannot be saved, unfortunately. But their name can still protect. Their stories can still unite and build policies. Their legacy can be still saved and save lives. For a future free from fear for all of us. Let's do the work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. What a powerful testimony. And I know there are many people in this room who have also spoken to survivors and heard their stories. And it's so inspiring when those women and girls turn their story into a fight for others. So we've heard from the UK Foreign Secretary and from Noor Norris about the importance of taking a holistic approach. This is about justice systems, this is about prevention, it's about education, and we need to make sure our response is comprehensive. We're now going to hear a video with testimonies from others saying why they believe ending violence against children is so important.
Violence is a deliberate attack on equality.
Across the world, we see women threatened by sexual violence, domestic abuse.
And for women and girls forced to flee, the risks only grow. At the moment, we're in a culture war globally against women and girls.
1 in 3 women globally are affected by gender-based violence.
That 1 out of every 5 girls before the age of 18 becomes the victim of sexual abuse.
Women and girls with disabilities facing 10 times greater the risk of violation and the gender-based violence.
We've seen the impacts that social media is having on our young men.
That means an epidemic of sexual violence,
which leaves deep and lasting scars.
There can be no such thing as a gender-just world unless every individual has the right to bodily autonomy.
Los gobiernos alrededor del mundo tienen una deuda histórica con las niñas, adolescentes y mujeres.
And so governments must put in place the laws and the policies and the guardrails.
And create a united global framework.
The kind of society that we want to build.
Where every woman and every girl lives free.
As men, we have a responsibility to speak up.
By holding young men and old men accountable.
Women and girls are protected.
Women and girls make up half of the world's population, and that means half of the world's potential. We cannot achieve our goals without protecting women and girls.
And I want survivors all around the world to know that they are not broken.
We are by their side.
You are not alone.
Know we are fighting for your rights.
Your act of healing is a show of strength.
And the world is changing because you have refused to be invisible.
You matter.
You are the change makers.
We see you, we believe you, and we stand with you.
We stand in solidarity with women and girls across the world.
Of the theme of the video, I am now going to, and thank you very much for bringing up the chair so quickly. We didn't want to interrupt the video. So in continuation of the theme of the video and hearing why leaders want to support this work, it's now my pleasure to welcome our panel to the stage. She was mentioned by our Foreign Secretary, Eva Granados, the Secretary of State for International Cooperation of Spain. Please come to the stage. David Miliband from IRC. Oh, there he is. Mafalda Duarte, the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund. Theo Soa, women's rights leaders and advocates, welcome. And of course, the Right Honourable Yvette Cooper. Thank you. So, as we've heard, violence against women and girls is not an issue that can be resolved by any one country or program or organization. It's a global challenge, which is why we think it's pertinent to discuss it here. One that demands collective action and political will and leadership across borders. At SIF, where I work, we see this not just as a moral imperative, but also as a real driver of everything we want to see in the world, shared prosperity and building a more just, resilient world for children, given the intergenerational dimensions. So I'm going to ask each of our panel members a question. I think there is a timer. I think they each have a few minutes to respond. And my first question is for the Spanish Secretary of State. As we heard, Spain has a long history of supporting cross-government work. With cross-party support, you can't sustain that work with cross-party support around domestic efforts to reduce violence. So can you describe for us that whole-of-government response, and what is hardest, and what's your advice to governments who want to do similar things?
Thank you for having us, and thank you, Secretary Cooper, for promoting the coalition. Indeed, eradicating violence against women and girls has been a long-standing commitment for Spain. We believe that addressing violence against women and girls requires more than isolated policies or individual ministries working alone. It requires a genuine whole-of-government approach, grounded in political and social consensus, institutional coordination, and a long-term commitment. As you said, a real call for action. In our case, one of the strongest examples of the commitment is the renewal of the State Pact Against Gender and Based Violence. It's 20 years, the Secretary of State has said. It was not just a political declaration, but a set of concrete measures organized into different areas of action. Awareness and prevention, improving institutional response, assistance and protection for victims, training for professionals, it's crucial, and better data and statistics. And perhaps the most important, it's a multi-year financial commitment and real legal reforms in the pact, improving protection orders, so expanding the legal concept of gender violence. The renewed pact was approved in the Spanish Parliament. It was supported for all political parties except the far right, and we are reaffirming that the fight against gender-based violence must remain a matter of state, beyond political cycles and beyond partisan divisions. For us, it's the consensus, it's very important. And the renewed pact expands Spain's collective response and updates the original framework to respond to emerging and evolving forms of violence in a holistic way. Among its priorities are strengthening protection for children affected by vicarious violence, addressing digital violence and online harassment, reinforcing action against sexual exploitation and trafficking, improving support for women in rural areas, migrant women, women with disabilities, we can see in the video, and Spanish women abroad. So it's a whole and holistic approach. This reflects an important lesson. Violence against women and girls is not only a security issue. It's not only a social issue. It's also a matter of justice, education, health, digital governance, very important nowadays, economic empowerment, and democratic resilience. That understanding has helped us to strengthen coordination between ministries responsible not only interior matters or social matters, but equally justice, education, health, social service, and foreign affairs. And it's very important, the coordination between local and regional institutions and governments. The consensus, the political consensus, it's very important. And then you have two questions for me. The first was, where has this work been hardest? And I think nowadays, I would say that the greatest challenge is confronting backlash and disinformation. Around the world, but including in Europe, we are witnessing attempts to question established rights and undermine gender equality policies. And this represents precisely why broad democratic consensus matters so much. The renewal of the State Pact sent an important message that protection of women and girls must remain a shared democratic responsibility. And another challenge is sustaining a coherence and continuity across institutions and over time. Whole of government approach are demanding because institutions naturally work in silos. So it's very important. Coordination requires constant political leadership. The minister, the Secretary of State, as a leader, can put always in the center of the agenda. It's very, very important, the political leadership and long-term commitment. And
thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was told to end this on time because we have the closing plenary. And thank you very much for sharing this very comprehensive approach. I'm just going to point to the numbers here to the panelists. You have to do some mental maths and subtract 4 because it's going backwards. So now you're warned. David, I should have said President of the IRC when I introduced you. I didn't see you because we'd mic'd up on the other side, but lovely to have you here as well.
Thank you.
You're going to help speak to humanitarian crises, and we know the humanitarian sector is under strain. So what are the signs of hope are there in terms of preventing violence? Because we know that's prevalent, we heard it.
Well, thank you very much for your leadership, and huge thanks to Yvette for her leadership on this issue. What we're seeing in the world's crisis zones, the International Rescue Committee is a global humanitarian organization that focuses on people whose lives are shattered by conflict and disaster. And what we're seeing in crisis zones around the world is an age of impunity. The impunity of one country invading another, the impunity of civilians being bombarded and hospitals being bombed, the impunity of the denial of aid, the impunity of the attacks on aid workers. But for me, the violence against women and girls is also an issue of impunity. And when there is impunity, there is a requirement to build countervailing power against that impunity to push back. And I just want to mention 3 things that seem to me very important. And I want to emphasize, these are not my ideas. I am being ventriloquized by the women and girls who speak to me, speak to us, by our own staff, by the people on the ground. So this is not my invention. This is the message that they wanted to bring to this conference. The first is if we're serious about preventing violence against women and girls, we need to prosecute successfully the perpetrators of violence against women and girls. The message that is sent, I mean, Yvette did something fantastic in her first few days in office. She agreed to have a video call with our team in Tawila, who were helping people fleeing out of El Fasher. The message that would go, if those women knew that the people who had abused them were actually being prosecuted, the people in command of those units were actually being prosecuted, the accountability part of this equation is absolutely key to send the message. Second, we're very proud to be hosting and leading a Foreign Office drive called What Works in Countering Violence Against Women and Girls. We've got to take away from the deniers the myth that nothing can be done. It's just not true that nothing can be done, both in treatment to help recovery, but also in prevention. And it's too often the case that people say, people in positions of funding as well, they say, well, this is always going to be there, there's nothing we can do. We've got to take that myth away, and we've got to insist that the evidence is there, not just of need, but of what can be done to tackle it. Thirdly, I want to pick up something that you said, Kate, right at the beginning, sometimes gets missed. The coincidence of violence against women and violence against children in emergency situations is overwhelming. But often, the violence against women and the violence against children is treated very separately by different parts of the humanitarian sector. We're big on impact evaluations. I'm incredibly proud of what we've done in Democratic Republic of Congo, in Pakistan, showing how if you try and tackle violence against women and violence against kids together, you can actually have really quite striking benefits, both for the women and obviously for the girls, but for boys as well, who are often subject to violence. So I think this, what's sometimes mentioned, it's violence against women and children of both sexes, and we've got to see them as a dual challenge that if they're attacked separately, are going to have much less effect than if we attack them together.
Yes, and the stats on violence against children are stark. Half of children worldwide face some kind of violence in their childhood. It's astonishing that it is so prevalent and yet receives so little attention. Thank you, David. Mafalda, it's lovely to see you, and we've worked together a lot on the Green Climate Fund, and thanks for the excellent work that you do there. For women and girls on the front lines, we've seen that climate emergencies result in more violence against women and girls, more child marriage, and so on, and expose children to violence and women to violence through displacement. Can you talk a little bit about, for some people it might not be intuitive, the connection between climate and violence? Can you talk about that?
Thank you very much. It's quite a pleasure to be here, and let me thank the UK government. It's not that common that in a development conference, one of the priority themes is violence against women and girls. So congratulations and to the hosts and organizers of this event. And for placing climate impacts as part of the conversation, because these are in fact key drivers, in multiple ways and forms of violence against women and girls. So it is quite well established, and there's a lot of data and studies out there that climate hazards or climate disasters, David will know it very well because working in the humanitarian space. First of all, mortality rates of women are higher, consistently higher than men. Violence is also much higher when these climate disasters occur. And in that context, law enforcement services, they are absent. They tend to be quite absent. So I think it's really important to understand that climate impacts, because they are extremely connected, interrelated with food and water security or stress. They are closely interconnected with displacement, with migration, even with conflict. They end up, and through all of those pathways, they end up impacting violence against women and girls. It's sort of like intuitive when we think about disasters, climate disasters, and whether the women and girls travel by themselves or with the families or with the male or without males. It is known that when there are these displacement situations, they are subject to a lot more violence. You mentioned another key driver is in situations of displacement, children significantly impacted. One of the ways also is child marriage. That incidence and various studies of the UN agencies have demonstrated as well. But not only when there are disasters and displacement, when there are stress in terms of food or water, and women and girls normally are the ones that have to, for example, travel longer distances to fetch water. This represents other opportunities and the incidence of violence against women and girls is increased. And in these situations as well, caused by climate impacts, there is a significant impact in income, and the fact that many of these women and girls might not necessarily have the assets and the agency that puts them in a position of higher risk and vulnerability as well. So in all of this, and we ourselves at the Green Climate Fund, and I commend again the UK government because, and it is not a recent endeavor, I commend the government of Spain as well for what they are doing domestically, but in terms of the UK government, there have been significant efforts in the context of the international organizations to make sure that there are clear policies in place. And I think this is fundamental. We can talk about the necessity for national policies, absolutely, but it's the same thing applies for international organizations. Without clear policies that demand that violence against women and girls, sexual exploitation and abuse are taken into account, not just in terms of the project design, but during implementation and the evaluation, because we have to acknowledge that it's a permanent risk. It's essential. Without that deliberation, without those requirements, without those policies, we fall short. And the likelihood of falling short is very high. So those policies that the liberation, but I go one step further. We can do more than that, because we can have a lot of finance and projects that are trying to do the right thing and design it in such a way that they try to mitigate, prevent, response during and after shocks. But importantly is actually to design the projects in such a way that one reduces the vulnerabilities and the risk. So if we avoid, and there are examples of interventions like that, of financing like that, when we do investments and we think, how can we prevent displacement? There are many different ways of trying to prevent displacement. How do we enhance the voice, the agency, the support system, the income, the livelihoods of women, such that we reduce this significant risk? We are being even more deliberate. We are really trying to get to the root causes of the violence. So that's basically what I think. Again, I'm congratulating the coalition of the governments that are behind what the minister just announced today. We need more countries to join that. It is very serious. It's 1 in 3 women globally. And I end with, because I was very moved as well with the stories. And I was very moved with in the first plenary of the conference, the poem of that lady from Somalia, I believe. And when she said that this is a choice, we can make choices. So these are choices that we need to make, and we need to make them consistently. Thank you.
Thank you, Mafalda. And important not to put safeguarding in a silo around social services and education, and really bring it into a multi-sectoral approach to safeguarding by design. Theo, I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a long time. You've been a fantastic advocate. We heard about the backlash. Can you share with us what you think works in terms of motivating action on this topic, and how are you adjusting it to the current context?
Okay, so bear with me a minute, because I'm going to tell a story first. And I'm telling the story because I think it links back to the question that you're asking. I'm really lucky to know Lima Bowie, the Liberian peace activist and women's rights activist. And she was talking to a group of us and telling us a story about how she and some other Nobel laureates took a group of journalists to the DRC to speak to women who'd survived violence. And she said the first woman came in and she told a horrible story about violence, about pain, about rape, about the destruction of life. And just when Lima thought, I can't take her talking about this anymore, the woman said, and then the women came, and they held me, and they helped me rebuild my house, and they helped my children find ways back to school. And she thought, oh. And then the second woman came in. Same stories of horror, of pain, of violence. And then she said, and then the women came, and they helped me replant my fields, and they helped me look and understand that I had a life beyond what I've just been doing. And she said, one after another, more than 10 women coming in, and with every single one, there would be that phrase, and then the women came. And then they opened it up to the journalists, and all the journalists jumped up. The first one said, and how many times did you say you'd been raped? And then the next one said, and did you say the whole of your house burnt down? And then another one said, and were your children watching while you were being raped? And then Lima just said, stop. Because what are you hearing? What are you going to go back to your countries around the world and report? Because what Lima heard was women saying that the first responders for them had been women. She heard women saying, this is how we rebuilt our lives. She heard women saying, we are survivors. She heard women saying, we rebuild our communities. The issue is that when journalists and the rest of us have this narrative around violence against women and girls, that women and girls are victims, it means that we don't tackle the problem in the ways that really do work. We know, and I thought really hard about using a conflict example, because we know, as the minister has just said, that this is not an issue that is constrained or confined to situations of conflict. We know that it is happening at local and national levels in virtually every country in this world. And we have to know that as long as those stories are out there around women as victims, which makes it easier to blame the women rather than looking at the systemic changes that need to be made, need to be looking at the fact that we need a societal-wide response, that we need to stop looking at violence against women and girls in a silo, thinking that it's a conflict problem, it's a problem of domestic abuse, it's a problem of technology. We've got to stop the siloing. And we know what works. We've got data that has been really deliberately collected. I'm not going to bore you with all the data, but do look up the What Works website, because there's a lot of data there. But we do know that you have to start by centering the rights of women and girls, the rights of all of us to safety, to security, and not just physical safety and security, but emotional security, economic security, mental security. And when you start looking at violence, when you stop looking at violence in this siloed way, but actually start looking at the responses as being an integrated set of actions and initiatives that are everybody's responsibility, and that we all have a role in playing, then we start changing the mindsets, and we have to change our mindsets. Violence in conflict situations doesn't come out of a vacuum. It comes out of what we are prepared to accept or not accept in our everyday lives. So we know we need to work together. We know we need integrated approaches. We know that we need to fund the people who are meant to actually, who do the work, the first responders. So we know what works. My question is, why do we continually stop putting the political and the individual and the collective will behind the responses? Because we know we have to. And I'll just say one last thing. Accountability, we're sitting here, the Epstein files, who's being held accountable there? If we can't hold people accountable in that setting, how are we going to hold people accountable in the Congo and in all these other spaces?
Thank you, Theo. And your point on political leadership is really important. Sorry to interrupt, but the Foreign Secretary has to go. So there's been a flashing warning because she's very important, obviously. Foreign Secretary, a few last comments from you. We'd be very grateful.
Yeah, I was unfortunate. They've actually even got a thing that flashes up at the bottom saying FS 2-minute warning.
Yeah, that's what I saw. I had a panic moment.
So unfortunately, I apologise, but Minister Chris Elmore is here, so can probably take my place. So he didn't know I was going to say this. Come and take my place on the stage in a couple of minutes. And what you will also know is we have our, Chris does a lot of the work within the department around tackling violence against women and girls, as well as some of the multilateral support around the UN work as well. And we also obviously have Harriet Harman as our envoy on women and girls as well. But no, a huge thank you, I think, to all of the other panel and for everybody being part of this discussion, because I think there's a point that is the most powerful one, which is actually this is all about what we do and how we empower victim survivors who have already taken action and supported each other and we know that so much of this is preventable.
Yes.
It is preventable, and also it is possible to hold people to account for what fundamentally are terrible crimes as well. And so all of this is about what is in our power, and ultimately in the spirit of the beginning, very opening of this conference, about the choices we make. We can choose to do this differently, domestically and internationally as well. So thank you very much.
Thank
and with
you
that,
so
I will
much.
rush off the stage.
So we're going to wrap up this session very soon. We've heard some very important interventions. Hello.
You don't argue with your boss when she tells you to get on the stage.
It was also very athletic. You didn't even use the stairs. The enthusiasm, we appreciate it. So we've heard about the importance of a whole-of-government approach, long-term, multi-stakeholder, multi-party in the context of, democratic process efforts. We've heard from about in humanitarian contexts, the importance of seeing this as part of the impunity which is facing us all, and the need to really face up to that at the current time, not shy away from it. We've heard that even sectors that you wouldn't necessarily think of as sectors of women and girls are on the front lines of dealing with the dangers facing women and girls, but also with hope, the responses. We heard from Theo a very powerful story about response, first responders as part of prevention, as part of the healing and the change that we need to see, but then throwing it back at us about our accountability, about how we talk about these issues and who we center in those conversations, and putting elephants in the room when they need to be there. So I'm going to thank you all. I just wanted to, because the timer I'm hoping is accurate and we still have another 10 minutes. If it's not, somebody should do a panic wave from over there. But I just want to hear from each of you, what do you think is the top priority? And I'm going to focus on the global agenda because this is a conference on international cooperation and partnership. Just a quick one sentence that doesn't have lots of commas in it, on what are the priorities for international cooperation at the current time. So, to the State Secretary.
This is my mandate. I'm the Secretary of State of International Cooperation, and our law in international cooperation defines Spanish development policy as explicitly feminist. So we place the women and the girls at the center of our international action. We have a strategy for feminist development, but the way forward is always through partnerships. We work with the United Nations agencies and this coalition, and I think it's put the women and the roots-based organizations in the center to improve the rights of women.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
David.
I would like to see, in every country that has not yet signed this declaration, 10 women and 10 men asking publicly why not. I would like for every donor to international aid, 10 women and 10 men asking why not have this at the center of your... I would like for every UN agency, 10 women and 10 men to be saying, why isn't this properly mainstreamed into what you are doing? I am a great believer, following you really, let's not just ask why is this happening, let's ask why are we not pushing back? And that seems to me to be the priority in this chaotic, multi-polar, multi-aligned world. Why not needs to be the question that leaders at national level, at institutional level, need to be answering.
Thank you very much. Our sentences are getting longer and longer. Move along the panel. The minister will be able to do a whole speech in a minute. No, I'm teasing. Mafalda, your priority.
Okay, you made the question broader, not just on the topic of women and girls. I'll come to the violence against women and girls, but I do want to say that it is really important that we are all become voices, that it is a myth to think that just focusing on the national boundaries will get us anywhere. Many of the problems that we are facing, these are problems that need to be resolved by cooperation, by international partnerships, by coming together. The world is connected. There isn't solving problems within national borders. So the multilateralism, international cooperation, we all have to be advocates, strong advocates of this agenda. The other thing that I would say, second sentence, is for the purposes of violence against women and girls, but for the purpose of this conference, which is about development, we hear a lot about silos. And the fact of the matter is we continue to work pretty much predominantly in silos.
Yeah.
We do need a paradigm that is about looking at what we are trying to achieve in a much more holistic, integrated way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mafalda. Theo.
Okay, speak very fast. No. Because this is a conference about global partnerships, I think that what I would really like to see is, first of all, a real, deliberate, intentional, and thoughtful placing of justice at the heart of those partnerships. Because if you have that, you will have gender justice, you will have racial justice, you will have disability justice, you will have people who are thinking not only of the mainstream, but of peoples who are marginalized or made to feel marginalized. And if we do that, and we're deliberate about that, it means we will resource initiatives properly. We will make sure that we are not working in short-term ways. We will understand that dignity of all partners is at the heart of what we do. And if we do that, then violence against women and girls will not be put as an afterthought. It means that when BII are making their decisions about how they invest, they're going to make sure they're not investing in companies that are putting women in dangerous situations in factories. It means that when philanthropists are deciding which organizations to fund, they're actually going to work with women's funds across the world who work with the first responders in the field. So I would like to see that deliberate placing at the heart of the partnerships agenda about true justice and true partnership. And then I'd like to see us act on it.
Yes. So we've heard about the centrality of partnership. We've heard about the importance of champions, determined champions of different institutions, coalitions. We've heard about the need for de-siloing, for taking a holistic approach to this everywhere. And we've heard about the need to put justice at the center, which means taking personal accountability as well as institutional accountability and acting. Minister, please don't do a really long speech.
I won't. I'm going to try very, very hard not to. Actually, my answer sort of maybe sums up the other four, is ministers need to be braver. There needs to be a clarity of purpose around challenging the rollback, not accepting that this is the status quo. Yeah. And as multilateral minister, but also as Minister for Women and Girls in the Foreign Office, fighting the rollback on language, challenging the fact that, you know, gender does matter, equality does matter, and not being frightened to challenge allies in this space as much as other people that you wouldn't necessarily agree with in the multilateral space. I think actually challenging the allies is the thing that actually needs the bravery, and that we don't accept that these things just have to happen because they're bigger than us or smaller than us or whatever it may be. But the bravery of ministers across government, not just ministers that lead on women and girls or lead in, for victims, it's actually governments having that bravery to challenge and to step up and say that these things can't stand. And I think it sort of fits with everybody else's view that we have to tackle this, we have to mainstream it, and also ending silos. I can't tell you how much that drives me round the bend. Ending the silo working would be something that I would see as a really positive outcome from this coalition, but also more broadly on ending violence against women and girls.
Thank you so much. I'd like everyone to give a round of applause to our panelists. And also a huge thank you to Noor Norris. Thank you for your work, for working on behalf of so many women and girls and survivors. And to the Foreign Secretary for bringing us all here today. I'm just going to ask the panelists to leave the stage, and a couple of closing remarks. We've heard from the Minister that this is not an inevitable problem if we choose, as the Poet Laureate said to us, if we choose to make a difference. The upcoming Ministerial on Ending Violence Against Children is in the Philippines in November. That's an opportunity to bring communities together. These things aren't in silos. You can't prioritize violence against one population versus another. These are integrated issues, and we need to put survivors at the center, lived experience, as we heard from the Foreign Secretary. The cost of inaction is so high, and if you aren't sufficiently moved by the suffering and the rights, we also have an abundance of evidence on the economic damage that is consistently done by thwarting the potential of such large parts of humanity. But we must come back to justice, because women and children's free from violence benefits everyone. And for closing, I'm going to invite to the stage South Africa's Deputy Director General of the Department for Women and Youth and Persons with Disabilities. Deputy Director General Shika Goyal, thank you so much for joining us and closing the plenary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Program Director, and please accept the sincere apology of Her Excellency Ms. Sindisiwe Chikunga, Minister of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities of the Republic of South Africa, who is unable to participate in person at the Global Partnership Conference due to an executive decision that recently assigned her the responsibility to head an additional department. The Minister conveys her appreciation for the invitation extended to South Africa and for the important platform created to advance global collaborations on issues affecting women, youth, and persons with disabilities. Therefore, Honorable Yvette Cooper, UK Foreign Secretary, Honorable Eva Granados, Secretary of State for International Cooperation of Spain, all protocol observed. Good evening. As ministers responsible for gender affairs and women's rights, we assume a very specific and impact role on addressing inequality issues in our respective portfolios, both locally and international. And as friends and allies, we also assume a support role towards the disclosure of human rights, the discourse of human rights and gender equality. And for that, I would like to take the opportunity to express my appreciation for the solidarity that you have shown and the role that you have played. Our deliberations today have reflected an urgent need to intervene to strengthen solidarity and camaraderie on issues that close to our hearts, issues that affect the most marginalized, and the deliberations have highlighted issues that we need to advance with vigor, with commitment, and solidarity. As we conclude this important gathering at the margins of 2026 Global Partnership Conference, our conversation has reflected that violence against women and girls is a global challenge, and no country to date has achieved it in addressing it fully alone. It is therefore clear that there is an immediate need for a shared responsibility for us to act, and for the efforts and commitments reflected by yourselves as allies and greater friends within the gender equality and human rights space. I express my heartfelt appreciation. It is evident that there is an immediate need for solidarity and continued conversation and partnership for us to address the scourge. But one must take a moment to appreciate the opportunity presented by the UK government through the Coalition on Violence Against Women and Girls to engage on the discourse, which on its own is a responsibility to us, but a challenging and demanding mandate to protect and advance the rights, the well-being of women and girls, and a task that historically we have undertaken. South Africa extends its sincere appreciation to all countries, organizations, communities, and allies and advocates who continue to stand firm in the global struggle for dignity, equality, justice, and freedom for violence. I wish, in a nutshell, at a very high level, take you through the strides that we made in South Africa as a country. We have a national strategic plan on gender-based violence and femicide. And I wish to indicate that this is a document that was co-authored by government and civil society, and not a government-led process. Secondly, we are in the process of concluding the establishment of a National Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide that will enable us with the coordination aspect of the work that we are doing. But we make it our business that we mainstream the National Strategic Plan on the annual performance plans of every government department, and that it is resourced appropriately. Also, we have a partnership with the UK government. We would like to express gratitude to this government because we have established a private sector, GBVF private sector fund, and the bulk of the funding is from the UK government. And on that note, I would like to commend the UK government for the effort that they've made in supporting us in this area of work. We are now in the process of localizing the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide because it cannot be a plan that is only at a national level. We are taking it to the municipalities, but we are also coming up with programmatic interventions to ensure that it is translated into practice. And for that matter, one of the key programs I just want to leave you with is what we call a 100-day challenge, where communities will identify hotspot area and communities in partnership with municipalities will take charge and put a plan and eradicate whatever hotspot that they are facing in 100 days. And we take pride in that kind of a program that we are referring to. We've heard throughout this engagement that meaningful change happens when survivors are heard, when communities lead, and when governments work hand in hand with civil society, private sector, faith-based organizations, traditional leaders, and international partners. We believe, therefore, that this renewed determination will help us accelerate implementation of commitments and ideas that we raised today, invest in prevention and early intervention, and commit to redirect those resources where they're needed most, strengthen data accountability and coordination, support locally led and community-driven solutions, but also engage men and boys as partners for positive masculinity. You walked this path with us during the G20, and we all agreed that one of our G20 legacy projects is the Positive Masculinity Program, and we intend to take it further. Ensure that no woman or girl is left behind, particularly women with disabilities, women who are in rural communities, and those in situations of heightened vulnerability. As I conclude, South Africa believes that solidarity remains our greatest strength. And through this partnership that is grounded in equality, shared responsibility, and human rights, definitely we can build society where women and girls live free from fear and violence. And as the world approaches key global milestones on gender equality and sustainable development,
Abi hepsi buradan dümdüz gelip bütün kızın arkasından dolanıp sağdan giriş yapıyor. Öyle toplanma yok. Eğlenme çok yok yani. Yok. Karaköy'de kimse yok. Karaköy'de toplanma yeri değil. başındaydı. Olmadı partiler.